Hello, this is Dave Rich with Geotech Computer Systems, and today we're going to talk about the Enviro Data Field Tool, also known as the Sample Planning Tool, that lets you plan your sample events, generate field documents, keep track of what you got, and we'll go through that, looking at kind of the big picture here, Enviro Data being in yellow. This is part of the Enviro Data Editor, and typically it will be done after the database setup, but prior to going out and taking your samples. So we'll go into the Enviro Data Editor now, and this button here, Sample Planning, is going to be where you're going to start off the sample planning process. And there's two parts to it, two levels. One is the plan and the other is the event. We had some clients come to us years ago and said, we want to take our sample plans, whether it's our sample analysis plan or quality assurance project plan or wherever we mark this down for the project, we want to put that into the software and have the software help with as much as it can. So the idea is that the plan you set up ahead of time, and it works particularly well for ongoing events. You might set up a plan for a quarterly sampling event, and then underneath the plan are the events themselves, which may vary from event to event. So you can lay out the plan, and then you can push the contents of that plan down to the event, or you can go into an event and fill it out without setting up the plan ahead of time. You need a plan, but you don't have to fill out the form. Or you can also take an existing event and clone it to the next event. But we're going to start here with this plan called Example Plan. And there's some information about the plan itself, but there's also these tabs in the middle. So we start with the Stations tab. And so we're going to take samples at MW1 and MW3. And then we're also going to take samples at a new soil boring, SB2. We're going to take samples from 0 to 10 feet every 2 feet. Then the next thing we do is we tell it the QC that's going to be applied in general to this plan. And this may change from event to event, but we're saying here to start, we're going to take at MW3 field duplicates MS and MSD at that particular location. And then the next thing is the methods and parameters. And you can tell it either the analytical methods that you're going to do at the lab, and it could be methods like 8260 and 8270, or it could be parameters. Specifically, we're going to do cadmium and arsenic. So those would be lab tests. And then you can also specify field tests that are going to be part of this, of the eventual event. And then these will not be displayed on the chain of custody, and they will be written out to a field file that you can fill out in the field. That's what this checkbox does. There's also a place for associating documents with your sample plans. We don't have any here, but you can. That could be the PDF of your QOP or SAP or whatever. And then you go to the sample events. In this case, we have one event under this plan. Now, if you look at these tabs here, Station, Station QC, Methods, and Parameters, and we go to the sample events, it has the same tabs. It also has some more. And the reason is that the plan is like a template, and then the event can contain what came down from the template, or it can be just filled out here. In this case, we brought down the contents of the first three tabs from our plan. So in this case, we're still at MW1 and MW3, soil boring at SB2. QC is the same, although if I were to take this event maybe and clone the next event from it, I might have different QC, maybe the next time at MW4. But so far, it's the same as the plan. And likewise with the methods and parameters. I filled it out up there, brought it down to here. Now the next tab, field samples, when we first come in here for a new event, it's going to be empty. And we would click on this generate button, and it would make the samples for us. In this case, one sample for MW1, 4 samples for MW3 because of the QC, and 5 samples for SB2 because of the depths. And it makes up names for these, which would be, in this case, it's a station name and a date and so on, or you can change these. And you can take the contents of this. If I select these, I can go in here to View Edit, and it brings up information about each of these samples that it's setting up. So, for example, this one here is a duplicate of MW3. And there's the 10 samples here that we made are here, and there's record selectors to go back and forth between them. But in this case, looking at this duplicate of MW3, I could type in a new name like Fred or whatever, or maybe I don't want the lab to know that this is a duplicate. I want the samples to be blind for going to the lab, I can click on Unique ID. If you watch up here, it changes it to some made-up number. Now that number is going to go on the container label and the chain of custody and go to the lab, and it's going to come back in the electronic deliverable, and then Enviro data will know that that's the duplicate of MW3. I want to leave that the way it was. In any of the Enviro data forms, you can undo a change just by pressing the escape key, so now it goes back to what was in there before. There's some additional information about that sample, but then down here, there's a tab that has the place where we're going to set up our container for this sample. So in this case, we're actually going to have two containers, and underneath those containers are going to be the methods or parameters that come with those. Each container is going to have certain methods and parameters. This is where we're telling it that. Once you set that up for one sample, you can apply it to the containers and methods to all the event samples, or you can make everyone different depending on what you need to do. Once I've set up my container program, I have a number of documents that I can make here. I can print a work list, which lets me specify for the field folks what's going to happen for each one of the samples. I can print a purge record. Oftentimes, people will purge the groundwater samples until they stabilize. So you can keep a document of that and then maybe not necessarily store all of the intermediate steps in the database, but just take the final values, but keep this in your log for what actually happened and how you got there. And then the last document from here is the container labels. And these are designed to print on a standard Avery label. And you write on here what actually happened, attach those to your containers. There's going to be a label for each container, and then send them off to the lab. From here, oftentimes the next step is going to be the chain of custody. You can have as many chains as you want for each one of your sample events. And in this case here, we're going to choose one of these chains and go look at it. You can specify on these tabs down here what goes on each chain, the samples, the methods and parameters, and then specifically which go with which. This allows you to have different methods and parameters for different samples. And then we go to Preview Print Chain, and here it comes. There's the transfer information at the bottom, and then up at the top we have our methods and parameters going across, and our samples going down the side. Now remember, if I had camouflaged these, then they would be showing that S-12345 thing. And then over here are how many containers for each sample are going to be taken for each one of the methods and parameters. So you print this out, maybe a couple different versions on different colored paper, and then one goes in the cooler, one goes in the logbook, and so on. Another thing you can do if you want to gather information in the field is you can click here on Export Field File. I'm going to go ahead and close this chain form. So I'm going to go here to Export Field File Example. I right-click. And what it does is it allows you to take what you've done on this in the field tool, and it shows me what I have on there. So I have my sample information, sample date, and so on. And then more importantly, all the way over here, we have a place to put in our field information, which could be our pH, depth of water, and so on, and enter it in this form, and then you could, from there, either import that into the database, send it back home, have somebody else do it, but the end result is going to be that your field data is going to be in the database and at some point tie in with the lab data when it comes in. The last thing in the field tool is the completeness report. And then in the completeness report is kind of like a chain of custody. It has the methods and parameters across the top and the samples down the side, and it shows you what you've received. So at the end of it, when you have the field data and the lab data in the database, you can run this report and make sure you got everything that you expected to get. Now, there's one other aspect of the software. So people have said, well, we like to set up the sample event ahead of time in the office where there's more time available. But oftentimes when I get out in the field, things have changed. Maybe I can't do my QC at MW3. So what you can do is you can set up your event and you can write it out to a remote field database. And then in that remote field database, you can take it on a laptop along with a kind of junior version of Enviro data for modifying the sample event, and then, so for example, one client, they do big projects at Air Force bases. They monitor about 100 wells in one sample event. So they go out in the field in the morning, they take all of their samples, and they mark on the sample bottles in grease pencil what they are, original of MW1 or whatever. At the end of the day, they bring those back. They usually have trailers on site, and then they update Enviro data field information with what actually happened in the field, and then they print their field documents, container labels, chains of custody and things, ship them all off, and then at the end of the event, they come back to the office and they update the database with what actually happened. So the idea is that by integrating the sample collection with the sample data importing and then eventually flowing on down to reporting, things are going to be more efficient and less error prone. As a matter of fact, once you have gathered samples through the field tool and you go down to the select data form in the Enviro data viewer, there's an option to gather or to retrieve all of the data from one particular sample event. So the whole thing is integrated from the sample planning all the way through the reporting.